Good evening. Tonight, we're looking at two stories that say a lot about where the power may be shifting in artificial intelligence. One involves Donald Trump and how he wants the power to regulate AI to stay with the feds and not the states. The other story is Meta or Facebook's deeper partnership with major news networks and what that means for journalistic influence in elections here and in other parts of the world. So both stories are raising questions about the same thing. Who ultimately will control the flow of information with AI? And what happens if those decisions move behind closed doors with governments and not the people? So let's go ahead and get into the first story. So something important happened last week, and it deserves some attention, primarily because it kind of ticks me off after I read about what Facebook is doing along with the alphabet networks. So, Meta, also known as Facebook, and of course, they had to change their name. It used to be Facebook, but because of a couple of things that happened with them, they changed the name to Meta, but are still keeping the Facebook name for the platform. They've recently formed a partnership with the major legacy news networks, which I call the alphabet networks: ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and some others. And when I read the announcement, it was pretty obvious to me how significant this is going to be as we move closer to another election cycle. The midterms are just around the corner. But what's scary is very few people are talking about it. Even fewer are connecting the dots because many of them probably don't even realize what's happening or what's being done. But if you remember how information was handled in previous years and even decades, this development fits into a familiar pattern. Journalism is supposed to stand between the public and misinformation. Yet that line has faded long ago. And it's not just weakening even more, it's now being absorbed into AI systems. At a journalism conference in London, the speakers there stated it very directly. And they're saying that media is becoming part of AI systems now. So if you combine that with something else, nearly 40% of people over 65 have never heard the word deepfake. And another study shows that only 1% of people across all ages can correctly identify an AI generated fake. So what this means is most people have no protection against what they are seeing if it's not real. So this is primarily why I wanted to do this live stream, is we're looking at the collapse of journalism. It's already happened. And new newsrooms now are completely relying on AI. And now Meta is working directly with legacy media. And the fact that the most vulnerable generation online is the same generation with the highest voter turnout, that's a problem. Older people now, as I'm sure you know, mostly go to Facebook and not many other platforms. So later in the story, I'm going to also explain how newsrooms in Cuba, Tunisia, India, and other regions are being hit with censorship, declining traffic, and they themselves are facing AI driven disruptions. And so those examples are going to reveal where this is heading in the United States. So let's get into it. To understand this moment in time where we're at in journalism, we need to look at how journalism itself has changed, not just the medium itself, but the substance of it. Most of what we read today is not written by people at all. And you may have noticed it yourself. You can pretty much sense it almost immediately. Pacing is off, the structure is mechanical, punctuation is unnatural, and it reads like the content was actually generated by a machine, but not crafted by a human being. So it causes you to constantly have to reread sentences. And then you also notice the telltale giveaway sign is the what's called an M dash. So it's those extra long dashes that no one ever uses. I've never used it. And I'm sure many people have never used it in their actual writing. But yet, many of these journalists who are now currently relying on AI are insisting that AI will never replace them. But the irony is that much of their work is already sounds obviously automated. But for a long time, I just saw this as a quality issue, but then realized it's much deeper than that. And it's going to go back into control and controlling the narrative. It's about also streamlining the narrative, which is much easier to do with AI. It is about the information and how they can run it continuously 24/7 without human involvement. And so it's going to be easier for them to shape public perception in the background. And the group that's going to be most affected is the one still placing the highest level of trust in what they see online combined with the legacy media, and that's baby boomers. And this isn't meant to be criticism, it's actual reality. About 40% of older Americans have never heard the term deepfake. If you have never heard the term, you cannot recognize the threat. And with only 1% of the population able to detect deepfakes accurately, that means almost everyone is actually exposed. So this is the context in which, in my opinion, Meta is partnering with the major news networks. This partnership is not about improving journalism. Journalism has already been hollowed out. It's about distributing influence at scale. It is about placing narratives directly in front of the people who trust these platforms the most. And, as well, the legacy media the most. Let's face it, most people that we know, our parents and older people, are still trusting CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, and most of them are using Facebook. So the best combination between Facebook and the legacy media is where they're going. And that's where I believe they're going to do the most influence. So tonight, or in this story, I'm going to break down exactly how this works. So let's start with Meta and their partnership and how it fits into the larger shift of what's happening right now. So again, Meta is partnering with ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, and others. Now, if you remember years ago, viewers, and they're still doing it to this day, they are leaving cable news, in other words, cutting the cord, to escape these alphabet networks. Most of us wanted to get away from them. So what did they do? They moved to YouTube, Facebook, podcasts like Joe Rogan and the like, and other independent creators because they no longer trusted the alphabet networks. This is really more of the younger generation, not necessarily the boomer generation. So people were moving to these alternative platforms in order to get independent news because they didn't trust these major networks anymore. So what did this do? The migration ultimately created an entire ecosystem of independent creators and media. But of course, the legacy media lashed out and they called them misinformation. They're untrusted. They need to be silenced. And you had all this censorship going on, especially during the COVID times. Now, those same networks are stalking the audiences they lost. So it's very similar to resembling an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend who shows up wherever you go, acting as if it's coincidence. Viewers left cable to get away from these outlets, and now the outlets are entering the platforms people switch to. So an example of that is people move to YouTube, for example. I moved to YouTube, and then you don't see ABC, NBC, or any of these alphabet networks, but then all of a sudden you start seeing them trickling in. And then they, of course, show up in your feed. And so you're sitting to yourself saying, look, I left cable so I didn't have to listen to these guys anymore and get away from them. And now they're showing up in my feed on YouTube. But unfortunately, the legacy networks, they didn't have any choice. They lost the reach and their influence and relevance. So they had to go to these platforms. But people still ultimately rejected them. Cable viewership is continuing to decline. And it's the only way, really, that a lot of these alphabet networks can stay in business is because they get money from the cable viewership. But boomers are the only demographic still using cable consistently. Even their numbers are declining. That's changing as well. But by integrating with Meta's algorithm, legacy media now can gain access to the audience they were losing touch with. So this is their last ditch effort to hold on to that baby boomer generation. And now with AI driven distribution, it's going to make it easier and faster, and they can manipulate that audience even more. And baby boomers rely heavily on Facebook. Again, it's their more popular platform. And this creates a prime environment for targeted messaging for these legacy media entities. Election cycles amplify this behavior in predictable ways. And so this partnership is about influence, not information. So let's look at the global newsrooms to kind of evaluate what ultimately is going to happen here. They admitted last week as well that AI is already shaping their work, and very deeply. And in the journalism industry itself, they revealed something very important about where all this is heading. There was a journalism AI festival in London, and it outlined major global changes. It was hosted by the Google News Initiative. And here's the other problem is, once again, you're seeing Meta Facebook, you're seeing Google, you're seeing these platforms that are so desperate to be involved in news, as opposed to just letting people do it independently. They don't want to lose control of it. And so now you're seeing how much they're trying to retain that control. So Google News Initiative and the London School of Economics put this conference on. And these international newsrooms stated openly that media is becoming part of AI systems. They themselves are seeing massive traffic declines of 50 to 60% in multiple countries. Search engines are now summarizing news rather than linking to it. And I think that's part of the problems. You have a combination of this lazy way of writing things, but then also lazy news consumption. People are only reading the headlines, and that's a major problem. In Tunisia, independent outlets are being ordered by the government to suspend activity. And so what they're doing is they're trying to use AI to preserve its reporting. In Cuba, outlets are using AI tools to track currency fluctuations, which has to do with the black market, believe it or not, because citizens rely on accurate data in the black market in Cuba, being a communist country. Newsrooms in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are adopting AI for survival, not convenience. So they're losing journalists. People aren't getting paid as well. They're having to quit. So now they're turning to AI to keep those news outlets open. So this is a worldwide shift. This connects to something that has been changing for years. So remember when true investigative journalism required actually showing up in person. So when we actually watched interviews, reporters actually traveled. They interviewed major figures in person. They actually gathered firsthand information. They got on a plane and they went somewhere. Now all reporting is happening behind a computer. And we're seeing, once again, AI-generated articles are dominating all platforms. And this is low effort, and it's disconnected from real events. So independent creators were filling the gap where real reporting used to exist. So let's discuss the group most vulnerable to the shifts we've talked about. The boomers are experiencing the highest rate of online scams. And again, many have never heard of the term deepfake. So if you don't know what a deepfake is, you cannot recognize it. Only 1% of people can accurately detect a deepfake as a whole. So, with voice cloning, impersonation, and political manipulation, this is going to increase much more rapidly. Now, you combine this with Meta's partnership, this creates a high risk environment. This is not criticism, it's recognizing a vulnerability that needs awareness. And this problem is not isolated to the United States. The Philippines is flooded with deepfake ads. India, South Africa, the US, the UK, they're facing coordinated deepfake campaigns. And there's no perfect detection system right now for it. There's a company called Invid, and they're considered one of the better options, but detection tools often lag behind new AI models. Those models are constantly updating very, very quickly. Newsrooms worldwide are overwhelmed. They don't have as many journalists, and the news is coming in rapidly, and they're having to compete with independent journalists. So AI is shaping news creation, distribution, and interpretation. So this is where I want to close this story. Everything we discussed, Meta's partnership with legacy media, the rise of deepfakes, the decline of journalism, and AI-driven distribution leads to one conclusion. People can no longer be certain what is real. And this video is not about pushing fear or politics, it's about bringing clarity. Older generations do not know what deepfakes look like. Younger generations assume they can't be fooled. And newsrooms themselves are being restructured around AI systems. So someone has to explain this clearly. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. Do you trust any news organization to be transparent about how it uses AI? And if you want tools that can help you understand and navigate AI, check the description. I update the free resources daily, and the more that you understand, the harder it becomes for anyone to manipulate you. Now, before I keep going, I want to mention something quickly so you don't miss it later. A lot of people who watch these streams forget one thing that actually matters if you want to stay ahead of what's happening with AI. You need to be subscribed. That way, you don't lose track of the updates, the breakdowns, and the stories that are shaping the space right now. And if you look in the description, there are free AI prompt downloads waiting for you. These are the same templates we use to create content fast without overthinking. They're simple, they save time, and they actually help you get better results, whether you're writing, planning videos, or trying to build anything with AI. So check those out when you get a minute. They're free, and they'll give you an edge while everyone else is still guessing. So let's get into the next story. This one is strange because nobody really knows what to expect, but everyone's already arguing about it. So this came out today. Trump is now saying that he is going to sign a new AI executive order this week, and it's supposed to override all the state level AI rules across the country. And the way they're describing it, it sounds like it's going to be one unified national rule, so tech companies don't get yanked around by 50 different governments. But that's not actually the part that grabbed me after reading this story. It's what they're hinting at behind the scenes and what this could mean if you're someone who watches how fast AI is moving and how slow government usually reacts. So I'm going to set this up because it's easy to miss the real stakes here. So states like California, New York, and Colorado, including Florida, I just did a story about it, and I posted it today. So check out that. It'll be the story before this one. These states have been writing their own AI laws, and a lot of the rules don't match. Some are strict, some are vague, and some are politically driven. And what Trump is basically saying is we're not doing the patchwork thing. He wants a single federal rule to bypass all of them. But here's where it gets interesting. When Politico reached out, his team wouldn't describe the order. They wouldn't even preview it. they wouldn't even give general boundaries. And that's usually, to me, a sign that something in the text is either controversial, incomplete, or politically explosive. And I'll get into why that matters in a second. But there's a bigger twist coming later in the video that connects something tech executives have been quietly lobbying for. So keep that in the back of your mind. So here's what we do know. He's calling it a one rule approach. It sounds clean, it sounds simple. But think about what that actually means. You're telling every state attorney general, every privacy office, every local tech regulator, you're done. Washington is taking the wheel. And depending on how you feel about federal power or state power, that's either a relief or a giant red flag. And I'm going to pause here because this is where I might go off on some tangents a little bit. So you got to ask yourself, do you trust a federal agency to regulate AI better than your state? Or do you trust your state more than the feds? Or do you just trust neither one and hope this whole thing settles before AI eats another industry? And that's the tension they're not saying out loud. Now, Politico said something that stood out. They mentioned that several states are pushing back already, which is not a surprise to me, calling this anti-democratic because it erases their authority, which I can completely understand why they would say that. And you can imagine California is not thrilled. But business groups, completely different reaction. Tech companies, they hate dealing with 50 different rule books. They've been lobbying for years for a single national standard, which is going to make it easier for them and make more money for them. And now they actually might be getting what they want. And that's when the question ends up hitting you. Is this being framed as protecting innovation, or is it protecting the companies who already control the entire AI ecosystem? And as well, these are the donors, keep in mind. And what happens when one rule becomes one bottleneck or one backdoor? So I'm going to add a little context because this ties into something Al Jazeera reported. They said the goal is to speed up AI progress by removing bureaucratic delays, which again is not a huge surprise. Now, this sounds great on paper. Nobody wants delays, but bypassing approvals is one of those phrases that can mean 100 different things, depending on who writes the fine print. Does bypass mean simple, or does bypass mean nobody checks anything? And in a lot of cases, especially with billion-dollar or trillion-dollar industries, it means nobody checks anything. These are different outcomes, and no one is explaining which version this is. There's also a weird timing piece here. The administration is trying to show strength on the AI regulation right after open AI hearings. And all of these safety scares, you're hearing a lot of stories that are coming out right now about chatbots and suicides, deep fakes, fraud cases, all kinds of crazy things that are happening. So a lot more lawsuits are coming out. So this might be a political response more than a policy one. And I think it happens to be both. And here's the open loop I want to leave hanging out for a moment. If this executive order really does override every state rule, what happens to all those lawsuits already underway? Does everything just get wiped out, or are they grandfathered in? And does big tech essentially get a reset button? And is that fair? And if that's true, who's going to benefit the most? And obviously, we know who that's going to be. So let's move to what this means for normal people, because that part always gets ignored, especially farmers that are dealing with all of these AI infrastructure builds. Every system in your daily life is already being rebuilt on AI. The court system, legal system, healthcare, hospitals, education, schools. The job market is a nightmare. Hiring, HR, loans, and insurance. And if the rules are unclear or constantly changing, or suddenly rewritten from the top down, the risk isn't AI gets out of control. The risk is nobody knows who's actually in control. And that's when things break. Jobs, identity systems, data privacy, election integrity. All of that depends on clarity, not speed. And this is the tension that makes the story important. If you're someone trying to protect yourself, learn these tools and get ahead of AI, or even just stay sane as the world changes, this kind of centralized rule can either help or hurt you. It can stabilize things or lock you into one set of rules that never update fast enough, especially on the federal side. And I don't know which one this will be yet, but based on how little they're saying, you can feel there's a catch somewhere. Now, I want to get to the part I teased earlier. This is the one detail that no one is talking about, but it might be the biggest reveal. Several AI companies, the big ones, not the tiny startups, they've been pushing for something called preemption authority, which means they want the federal government to block states from interfering with AI deployment. Why? Because state rules are slowing down the launch of their new systems. And if this executive order includes that, which it likely does, then this isn't about protecting consumers. It's about speeding up rollout. It's about making sure nothing slows the race. And here's the twist. If the states lose this fight and the federal rule becomes the only rule, then the people with the most influence over AI policy become the AI companies, not the people or the government. They'll shape it. They'll interpret it. They'll meet with regulators privately. And when you hear the phrase one rule, you have to ask, one rule written by who? One rule enforced by who? And one rule benefiting who? Those are three different and important questions. So the most concerning thing isn't the executive order itself, it's the silence around it. When governments hide the details, it usually means the details change something big. And when you tie that to the speed that AI is growing right now, the real takeaway isn't panic, it's awareness. It's recognizing how fragile these systems are when leaders don't communicate. And it's understanding that if you wait for government to protect you from AI, you're going to be waiting forever. So I'm going to wrap this up with a simple question that you can answer in the comments because I'm curious where you land on this. Do you trust a single federal AI rule more than 50 states? Or does that make you feel even more uneasy? And do you feel like AI companies should have that much influence? Let me know what you think because this is going to be the fight going into next year. And once again, if you want tools to protect yourself from this mess, those links are in the description. I appreciate you watching, everybody, tonight, and we will call it a night, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Have a great night.